Grizzly attacks are a rare but stark reminder of the raw power and unpredictability of wildlife. Though these bears are not naturally inclined to attack humans, they can become dangerous if they feel threatened, startled, or cornered. With their size, speed, and sharp instincts, a grizzly's defensive actions can escalate quickly. Understanding their behavior and respecting their territory is crucial for anyone venturing into bear country. These attacks are often more about survival and instinct than aggression, emphasizing the delicate balance between humans and the wilderness they share. On the remote Shantar Islands, located in the Sea of Okhotsk off Russia's eastern coast, a routine missing persons investigation turned into a horrifying encounter on April 1st, 2025. The islands, known for their pristine wilderness and diverse wildlife, had been experiencing unusually harsh weather conditions that spring, forcing many animals to venture closer to human settlements in search of food. The Shantar Islands Police Department, a small unit consisting of just 12 officers responsible for maintaining order across the archipelago's nearly 1,000 square miles of territory, received a distress call early that morning. The Kuznetsov family, Dmitry, Yelena, and their two children, Maxim and Anastasia, had failed to return from a 3-day hiking expedition in the northwestern region of Bolshoy Shantar, the largest island in the group. Sergeant Vladislav Popovich, a 20-year veteran of the force, assembled a team of 4 officers, Natalia Sokolova, Mikhail Lebedev, Igor Baranov, and Pyotr Kozlov, to investigate the family's disappearance. The team departed from the station at approximately 8:15 a.m., traveling in their only patrol vehicle, a reinforced UAZ Patriot SUV specially modified for the island's rugged terrain. After a 90-minute drive along barely passable roads, the officers reached the Kuznetsov family's registered starting point, a popular trailhead near the Yakshina River. Sergeant Popovich decided to split the team. He would lead Officers Sokolova and Lebedev into the forest to follow the hiking trail, while Officers Baranov and Kozlov would remain with the vehicle and establish a communications base. As the search party ventured deeper into the woods, Officers Baranov and Kozlov began unpacking equipment from the SUV. Unknown to them, a massive Russian grizzly bear had been tracking their movements from the dense underbrush, approximately 50 yards away. The bear, an adult male later estimated to weigh over 800 pounds, had likely been drawn to the area by the scent of the officers' packed lunches and energy bars stored in the vehicle. Wildlife experts would later determine that this particular bear had been suffering from food scarcity. The unusually cold spring had delayed the emergence of many plants the bear typically relied on after hibernation, making it both desperate and aggressive. At approximately 10:27 a.m., as Officer Kozlov was retrieving the radio equipment from the back seat, the bear charged from the forest line with startling speed. Officer Baranov, who had been setting up a portable table nearby, spotted the animal too late to warn his colleague. The bear slammed into Officer Kozlov with enough force to throw him several feet before turning its attention to the vehicle itself. In a display of remarkable strength, the enraged bear smashed through the driver's side window with its paws, attempting to reach the food containers inside. Officer Baranov, seeing his partner injured and disoriented on the ground, grabbed his service pistol and fired a warning shot into the air, hoping to scare the animal away. The gunshot only seemed to further agitate the bear, which abandoned its interest in the vehicle and charged toward Officer Baranov. Despite firing 2 shots that reportedly hit the bear, the bullets failed to stop its advance. The massive animal knocked Officer Baranov to the ground, causing him to lose his weapon in the process. Meanwhile, Officer Kozlov had regained enough consciousness to activate the emergency signal on his radio, alerting the search party to the attack. The bear, perhaps startled by the radio's sudden squawking noise, momentarily left Officer Baranov and returned to destroying the vehicle, tearing off the side mirror and clawing at the interior through the broken window. Sergeant Popovich and Officers Sokolova and Lebedev rushed back toward the trailhead upon hearing the distress call, covering the mile-long distance in record time. As they emerged from the forest, they witnessed the bear tearing at the upholstery of their patrol vehicle while their colleagues lay injured nearby. Sergeant Popovich immediately instructed Officer Lebedev to circle around to retrieve the fallen officer's weapon, while he and Officer Sokolova attempted to distract the bear by shouting and waving their arms. The bear, now in a full rage, abandoned the vehicle and charged toward the new threats. Officer Sokolova discharged her weapon but missed in the chaos. The bear reached Sergeant Popovich first, knocking him down and inflicting deep claw wounds to his chest and abdomen, before turning on Officer Sokolova, who suffered severe injuries to her arm and shoulder while attempting to fend off the attack. Officer Lebedev, who had successfully retrieved his colleague's weapon, fired multiple shots at the bear, finally hitting it in a vital area. The injured animal retreated several yards before turning back toward the officers once more. Just as it appeared the bear would charge again, a final shot from Officer Lebedev struck the bear in the head, causing it to collapse. Despite their serious injuries, all 5 officers survived the encounter. Officer Kozlov suffered a concussion and 3 broken ribs. Officer Baranov sustained deep lacerations to his legs and back. Sergeant Popovich required surgery for internal bleeding. Officer Sokolova nearly lost her arm from the bear's powerful bite, and Officer Lebedev suffered minor injuries while helping his colleagues. A rescue helicopter arrived 90 minutes later to evacuate the wounded officers to the regional hospital in Nikolaevsk-na-Amur on the mainland. The patrol vehicle was determined to be completely destroyed, with damage estimated at over 2.5 million rubles. 2 days later, a specialized search team discovered the remains of the Kuznetsov family's campsite, approximately 3 miles from the trailhead. The site showed clear evidence of a violent bear attack, with torn equipment and signs of a struggle. The family's remains were located nearby, partially buried in a manner consistent with bear behavior. DNA testing later confirmed that the same bear responsible for attacking the officers had also killed the Kuznetsov family, likely 24 to 48 hours before the officers arrived. Wildlife authorities concluded that the bear's unusual aggression resulted from a combination of factors: post-hibernation hunger, territorial defense during mating season, and possibly neurological issues, as a preliminary autopsy of the bear revealed signs of a parasitic brain infection that may have affected its behavior. The incident prompted the regional government to implement enhanced safety protocols for both residents and visitors to the Shantar Islands, including mandatory bear safety training, increased patrol frequency in popular hiking areas, and the establishment of emergency response stations throughout the archipelago. In the densely wooded terrain of Pennsylvania, a peaceful autumn afternoon in October 2022 quickly transformed into a life-threatening encounter between an experienced hiker and one of the region's normally shy black bears. The park, established in 1923, encompasses nearly 500,000 acres of pristine wilderness in northwestern Pennsylvania, known for its diverse wildlife and challenging hiking trails that attract outdoor enthusiasts from across the eastern United States. Samantha Wilhelmina Greenwood, a 41-year-old postal worker from Erie, Pennsylvania, had been hiking solo through the forest's remote trails for over a decade. Despite weighing approximately 400 pounds, Samantha was surprisingly agile and had built remarkable stamina through her years of woodland exploration. She often ventured into secluded areas where few hikers dared to tread, preferring the solitude and untouched beauty of these less traveled paths. On October 14th, Samantha set out early in the morning on what was supposed to be a day-long hike along the Bradford Ranger District's eastern boundary. She had informed friends of her planned route and carried appropriate supplies, including bear spray, a precaution she had always taken but never needed to use in her previous excursions. The morning passed uneventfully as she navigated through golden autumn foliage, documenting interesting flora with her camera and recording observations in her hiking journal. Around 2:15 p.m., Samantha deviated slightly from her planned route to explore a particularly scenic ravine about 7 miles from the nearest ranger station. The area featured a series of small waterfalls cascading over ancient rock formations, creating a picturesque scene that Samantha wanted to photograph. Unknown to her, this secluded spot was also frequented by local wildlife seeking water, including a 3-year-old male black bear that had recently established territory in the vicinity. As Samantha made her way through a particularly dense section of underbrush, she inadvertently startled the black bear, which had been feeding on berries just a few yards ahead. According to wildlife experts who later investigated the incident, the bear was likely as surprised as Samantha, having not detected her approach due to the masking sound of the nearby waterfall. The sudden encounter triggered an immediate defensive response from the bear. Instead of fleeing as black bears typically do when encountering humans, this particular animal charged directly at Samantha. The abruptness of the attack left her with no time to reach for her bear spray, which was secured in a side pocket of her backpack. The bear, though considerably smaller than Samantha, at approximately 250 pounds, tackled her with sufficient force to knock her to the ground. As she fell backward onto the forest floor, her backpack partially cushioned the impact, but also hampered her ability to quickly regain her footing. The bear immediately began clawing at her exposed right side, tearing through her hiking jacket and causing deep lacerations across her ribs and upper abdomen. Despite the shock and pain, Samantha's survival instincts kicked in. She later recalled attempting to curl into a protective ball while simultaneously yelling as loudly as she could, a technique she had learned in wilderness safety courses. With her right arm, she tried to shield her face and neck while using her left hand to blindly search for a rock or branch she might use to defend herself. The commotion attracted the attention of a group of 4 hikers who had been exploring a parallel trail approximately 150 yards away. Elliot Thaddeus Blackwood, a 35-year-old software engineer from Pittsburgh, was leading the group when they heard Samantha's cries for help. Recognizing the sounds of distress, Elliot instructed his companions to create as much noise as possible while they rushed toward the source of the screams. As the group approached, they began banging their hiking poles against trees and shouting in unison. The sudden cacophony startled the bear, which momentarily backed away from Samantha. Sensing an opportunity, Elliot directed 2 members of his group to continue making noise, while he and another hiker cautiously advanced towards Samantha, deploying their own bear spray to create a deterrent perimeter. The combined effect of multiple humans and the irritating spray proved sufficient to convince the bear to retreat. The animal withdrew into the forest, though it remained visible at the periphery for several minutes, huffing and pacing before eventually disappearing into the dense undergrowth. With the immediate danger past, the hikers turned their attention to Samantha's injuries. Her right side had sustained significant damage, with 4 deep claw wounds extending from her armpit to her hip. The attack had also left puncture wounds on her right shoulder where the bear had initially seized her. Most concerning was a particularly deep laceration between her ribs that was causing considerable bleeding and bubbling during respiration, a possible indication of a punctured lung. Elliot's group included Marjorie Penelope Winterbourne, a retired emergency room nurse, who immediately recognized the severity of Samantha's condition. Using supplies from the group's first aid kits, Marjorie applied pressure dressings to the wounds and helped position Samantha to facilitate breathing while minimizing movement of her injured side. Meanwhile, another member of the group, Zachariah Finley Thornton, used a satellite phone to contact emergency services. Due to the remote location, a rescue helicopter was dispatched from Warren General Hospital, located approximately 30 miles northwest of their position. However, the dense forest canopy prevented the helicopter from landing directly at the scene. After consulting with emergency dispatchers, the hikers carefully constructed a makeshift stretcher using their hiking poles and jackets. Over the next hour, they transported Samantha nearly a mile to a small clearing, where the helicopter could safely lower a rescue technician and emergency medical equipment. Samantha was airlifted to UPMC Hammond in Erie, where she underwent emergency surgery to repair damage to her intercostal muscles, address the punctured lung, and clean and close the numerous lacerations. The medical team noted that her substantial body mass had likely prevented the bear's claws from penetrating more deeply, potentially sparing her vital organs from further damage. After a 2-week hospital stay and subsequent rehabilitation, Samantha made a remarkable recovery. The Pennsylvania Game Commission conducted an investigation into the incident, collecting DNA samples from Samantha's clothing and comparing them with bears in the region. Wildlife officials later determined that the bear responsible for the attack was likely a young male that had been displaced from its original territory due to competition with larger males during the pre-winter feeding period. In the aftermath of her recovery, Samantha became an advocate for wildlife safety education, frequently giving talks at outdoor recreation clubs and visitor centers throughout the Allegheny region. She emphasized that her experience was exceptional and unlikely to be repeated, but nonetheless stressed the importance of proper preparation and awareness when venturing into bear country. The vast backcountry of Montana's wilderness had always drawn adventurers seeking solitude among its rugged peaks and pristine wilderness. In the summer of 2015, the park was experiencing an unusually warm season, attracting more hikers than typical for early June. Established as a park in 1910, the region spans over 1 million acres of protected wilderness along the Canadian border and is home to one of the densest grizzly bear populations in the lower 48 states. Maria Constance Velasquez, a 34-year-old wildlife photographer from Portland, Oregon, had been hiking through the remote northeastern section of the park for 3 days. An experienced backcountry traveler with over a decade of wilderness excursions across North America, Maria had encountered bears before and always followed proper protocols. She carried bear spray, stored food in bear-resistant containers, and made noise while hiking to avoid surprising wildlife. Accompanying Maria on this expedition was Thomas "Tom" Wellington Hargrove, a 42-year-old environmental scientist whom she had met at a conservation conference earlier that spring. Though they had only known each other for a few months, they discovered a shared passion for documenting threatened ecosystems and had planned this week-long trek to photograph the park's alpine meadows before summer tourism reached its peak. On June 7th, after an exhausting 14-mile hike through challenging terrain, the pair reached a serene valley alongside Quartz Creek, approximately 22 miles from the nearest ranger station. The location featured a small clearing surrounded by dense pine forest, with the creek running along its eastern edge. They decided to set up separate campsites within view of each other, following park regulations that recommend dispersed camping in remote areas. Tom chose a spot about 50 yards from Maria, beneath a stand of mature lodgepole pines, and began setting up his tent, while Maria organized her gear near the creek. The long day of hiking had left them both fatigued and hungry. As twilight approached, Maria realized she needed a quick energy boost before preparing their proper meal. This moment of hunger-driven impatience would prove fateful. Breaking a fundamental rule of bear country safety, Maria retrieved a protein bar and trail mix from her food bag without relocating to their designated cooking area, which they had established 100 yards from their sleeping sites. This cooking area was intended to keep food odors away from where they would sleep. Even more critically, she left her food bag open on the ground beside her as she sat on a fallen log near the creek's edge. Tom, focused on securing his tent in the increasing wind, noticed Maria's lapse but was too far away to address it immediately. He later recalled seeing her with food out, but assumed she would properly store everything once she finished her snack. He continued with his campsite setup, occasionally glancing in Maria's direction as daylight began to fade. Unknown to either hiker, a 6-year-old female grizzly bear had been foraging in the valley for several days. The bear had 2 cubs from the previous year that were still traveling with her, though they were not present during the subsequent encounter. Wildlife biologists later determined through DNA analysis that this particular bear had no previous history of human conflict, but had recently experienced food stress due to poor berry production in her usual foraging areas. At approximately 7:40 p.m., as Maria sat with her back to the forest edge, the grizzly emerged silently from the tree line, likely drawn by the scent of her open food bag. Tom, who had just finished securing his bear canister 30 yards from his tent, spotted the bear's movement from the corner of his eye. He immediately froze, assessing the situation. The bear approached cautiously, its nose raised to catch the food scent on the early evening breeze. Tom later described that Maria remained unaware of the bear's presence until it was approximately 15 yards behind her. At this point, he called out to warn her of the bear and instructed her not to move. Maria's reaction, a sudden turn of her head followed by an instinctive attempt to stand, triggered the bear's predatory response. Wildlife experts later explained that her quick movement likely registered as potential prey behavior to the grizzly. The bear charged, covering the short distance in seconds. Tom reported that he shouted and waved his arms while retrieving his bear spray, but the attack happened with devastating speed. The grizzly struck Maria from behind with enough force to throw her several feet forward. Before she could recover, the bear was upon her, delivering a powerful bite to her upper shoulder and neck. From his position across the camp, Tom deployed his bear spray, but a sudden shift in the wind direction rendered it largely ineffective. He grabbed a nearby trekking pole and ran toward the attack, shouting and striking trees with the pole to create noise. His intervention momentarily distracted the bear, which looked up from Maria's motionless form, huffed several times, and then surprisingly retreated into the forest, rather than challenging the approaching human. Upon reaching Maria, Tom found her unconscious with catastrophic injuries to her neck, shoulder, and upper back. He immediately activated the emergency SOS function on his satellite communicator and attempted to administer first aid, applying pressure to the actively bleeding wounds. Despite his efforts, Maria never regained consciousness. Park rangers and emergency medical technicians arrived via helicopter nearly 3 hours later, but Maria had already succumbed to her injuries. The medical examiner later determined that the initial bite had severed her carotid artery and broken her neck, causing rapid blood loss and likely immediate unconsciousness. In the aftermath, park officials located and identified the bear through hair samples collected at the scene. After confirming it was the same animal involved in the attack, wildlife managers made the difficult decision to euthanize the bear, citing concerns about potential future aggression. The bear's 2 yearling cubs were successfully relocated to a wildlife rehabilitation facility. The investigation concluded that the attack was the result of a sudden close encounter with food-motivated behavior, rather than predatory or defensive aggression. Ranger Elijah Pemberton, who led the incident review, noted in the official report that the victim's momentary lapse in food handling protocol, combined with her startled response when warned about the bear's presence, created a perfect storm of unfortunate circumstances. Tom Hargrove, profoundly affected by witnessing his companion's death, later established the Maria Velázquez Foundation for Wilderness Safety, which funds educational programs teaching proper food management techniques in bear country. The incident, while tragic, served as a powerful reminder to the outdoor community about the importance of unwavering adherence to safety protocols in wild spaces. The morning of July 13, 2019, began like any other at Camp Sokolniki on Iturup Island. Located in the Russian Far East, this remote island in the Kuril chain sat between the Sea of Okhotsk and the Pacific Ocean. Iturup, a contested territory between Russia and Japan, stretched 200 kilometers in length, but averaged only 25 kilometers in width. Despite its disputed status, the Russian government had maintained the summer camp since 1983, primarily serving children from military families stationed in Vladivostok and Khabarovsk. Camp Sokolniki occupied a clearing in the eastern foothills of the dormant Baransky volcano, surrounded by dense taiga forest and salmon-rich rivers. The camp's isolation, nearly 40 kilometers from the nearest settlement of Kurilsk, was precisely what made it appealing. Children ages 8 to 12 could experience pristine wilderness under the careful supervision of trained staff. Camp Director Veronika Petrova had implemented strict wildlife precautions. Food waste was stored in bear-proof containers, and the camp boundaries featured solar-powered electric fencing. Staff conducted regular perimeter checks. For 7 consecutive summers, these measures had proven effective. Until they didn't. At approximately 9:15 a.m., 11 children gathered at the camp's eastern edge for a morning nature observation session. Counselor Arkady Sorokin, a 24-year-old biology student from Far Eastern Federal University, supervised the activity. The children sat in a semicircle on logs, sketching native plants while Arkady explained their ecological significance. Nobody noticed the 3-year-old male Ussuri brown bear, a subspecies of the grizzly that had been systematically testing the perimeter fence throughout the night. Camp maintenance logs later revealed that a fallen tree had compromised a section of the fencing during a storm 3 days earlier. Though reported, repairs had been delayed due to supply shortages. The bear, estimated to weigh 350 kilograms, entered the campgrounds through this gap sometime before dawn. Wildlife experts theorize that poor salmon runs that season had pushed the animal to explore new territories for food. The scent of breakfast preparation likely attracted it toward the camp kitchen, but the children's sudden movement during their nature activity diverted its attention. 10-year-old Mikhail Kuznetsov was the first to spot the bear approaching from behind a storage shed. His warning shout alerted Arkady, who immediately implemented emergency protocols. The counselor instructed the children to group together while he positioned himself between them and the advancing bear. Brandishing a walking stick and shouting, Arkady attempted to intimidate the bear while the children retreated toward the main lodge. Most made it safely, but 8-year-old Denis Ivanov tripped over exposed tree roots. His friend, 9-year-old Alexei Volkov, stopped to help him up. The bear charged. Kitchen supervisor Galina Orlova, alerted by the commotion, emerged from the main building with the camp's only firearm, a signal flare pistol kept for emergencies. She fired 2 flares near the animal, momentarily disorienting it but failing to deter its advance. The bear reached Denis and Alexei before they could escape. With one powerful swipe, it knocked both boys to the ground. Arkady immediately threw himself toward the bear, striking it repeatedly with his walking stick while shouting for the boys to run. The distraction worked briefly. Denis scrambled away with lacerations to his back, but Alexei remained pinned. The bear turned its attention from Arkady back to the prone child, inflicting severe wounds to Alexei's shoulder and chest before camp security officer Dmitry Baranov arrived with impromptu weapons, a fire extinguisher and an axe. Dmitry discharged the extinguisher directly at the bear's face while Arkady pulled Alexei free. The chemical irritant and noise finally drove the animal back toward the forest perimeter, where it lingered for several minutes before disappearing into the trees. Inside the main lodge, camp nurse Svetlana Ivanova initiated emergency medical protocols. Denis suffered 4 deep lacerations requiring immediate suturing, but no life-threatening injuries. Alexei's condition proved far more serious, with a partially collapsed lung and severe blood loss from multiple puncture wounds. Camp administrator Yuri Popov radioed the nearest emergency services in Kurilsk, but poor weather conditions made immediate helicopter evacuation impossible. For 3 critical hours, Svetlana worked to stabilize Alexei with limited medical supplies, while Dmitry and 2 other staff members maintained armed patrols around the camp perimeter. By noon, regional wildlife authorities arrived via all-terrain vehicles, followed 30 minutes later by a medical evacuation team that had navigated treacherous mountain roads. The wildlife officers immediately organized a tracking party to locate the bear, which they found approximately 2 kilometers from the camp, still in the vicinity. Following Russian wildlife management protocols for animals that have attacked humans, the officers euthanized the bear. Necropsy results later revealed that the animal had been in poor physical condition, with significantly depleted fat reserves that would typically sustain it through leaner periods. Both injured children were transported to Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk Regional Hospital on neighboring Sakhalin Island. Dennis recovered quickly after treatment, but Alexei remained hospitalized for 3 weeks, requiring 2 surgeries to repair damage to his shoulder and chest wall. The incident prompted immediate policy changes across all Russian wilderness camps. The Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment mandated redundant fencing systems, increased the minimum number of security personnel required, and implemented daily wildlife activity reporting requirements. Camp Director Veronika Petrova, though cleared of negligence by subsequent investigations, resigned from her position. In a statement to regional media, she explained that when one works in wilderness education long enough, they develop protocols for every conceivable emergency. What happened at Sokolniki reminded everyone that nature always has one more variable than we've accounted for. As for Camp Sokolniki, it reopened the following summer with enhanced security measures, including motion sensors, reinforced fencing checked 3 times daily, and a permanent wildlife officer position. The camp now included the incident in its safety orientation, teaching children that survival in bear encounters often depends on group cohesion and quick thinking, lessons demonstrated by the brave actions of Counselor Arkady Sorokin, who received Russia's Medal of Courage for his role in protecting his young charges. The village of Panchgani, nestled within the scenic western Ghats of Maharashtra, India, had always maintained an uneasy coexistence with the surrounding wilderness. In December 2018, this delicate balance was tragically disrupted, leaving 1 man dead and an entire community deeply shaken. The incident occurred along a remote connecting road that wound through patches of dry, deciduous forest, separating Panchgani from neighboring Mahabaleshwar, an area known for its sweeping vistas, strawberry farms, and increasingly fragmented wildlife corridors. Rajesh Kumar Damodar Nanavati, a 35-year-old spice merchant from Mumbai, had been visiting the region on a combination business and leisure trip. Having concluded negotiations with several local strawberry farmers regarding vanilla bean imports, Rajesh Kumar decided to spend an additional day photographing the area's picturesque landscapes before returning to the city. An amateur photographer with a growing Instagram following for his nature compositions, he often sought unique wildlife encounters to share with his online audience. December 12th began with light fog blanketing the valleys as Rajesh Kumar set out on a rented motorcycle at approximately 7:15 a.m. According to his guesthouse proprietor, he had mentioned plans to visit several viewpoints along the less-traveled back roads, where tourist buses rarely ventured. The weather was unseasonably warm for December, with temperatures reaching 28 degrees Celsius by mid-morning, driving many forest creatures to seek water sources near human settlements. Mahendra Prakash Gaikwad, a 61-year-old sorghum farmer whose fields bordered the forest edge, had risen early that morning to inspect the irrigation channels on his property. From his elevated position on a terraced field, Mahendra had a clear view of the narrow road below that connected 2 larger highways. At approximately 8:40 a.m., he noticed a motorcycle slowing to a stop along a particularly desolate stretch, where the forest pressed close to both sides of the pavement. What Mahendra observed next would become crucial testimony in the subsequent investigation. Approximately 30 meters ahead of where Rajesh Kumar had parked his motorcycle, a dark shape lay motionless on the sun-warmed asphalt. Through the morning haze, both Mahendra and apparently Rajesh Kumar mistook this shape for a dog or perhaps a wild boar that had been struck by a vehicle and left on the roadside. From his vantage point, roughly 80 meters away, Mahendra watched as Rajesh Kumar approached the form with his camera raised, apparently intending to document the scene. Only when Rajesh Kumar had closed to within 5 meters did the farmer realize with horror that the shape was actually a sloth bear, a species notorious throughout rural India for its unpredictable temperament and fierce defensive behaviors when startled. The sloth bear, a female later estimated to be around 7 years old, had likely been warming herself on the heat-absorbing road surface after the cool night, a common behavior observed in the region during winter months. Whether unconscious, sleeping deeply, or perhaps ill, the bear had remained completely immobile until Rajesh Kumar's approach. Mahendra later reported to authorities that he had shouted a warning, but the distance and morning ambient sounds, birds, distant traffic, and the gurgle of irrigation channels meant his calls went unheard. As Rajesh Kumar leaned forward for a close-up photograph, the bear suddenly sprang to life with explosive speed. The initial attack lasted mere seconds. The bear lunged upward, immediately striking Rajesh Kumar with its front paws and knocking him backward onto the pavement. Before he could recover, the animal pounced upon him, delivering powerful bites to his face and neck. Sloth bears, while primarily insectivorous, possess some of the most powerful jaws relative to their size in the bear family, capable of cracking open termite mounds and excavating roots. Mahendra, witnessing the horrific scene unfolding below, immediately ran toward his house to retrieve help. He told investigators that he returned within minutes with his adult son and a farm implement, rushing toward the road while shouting and making noise in an attempt to drive the bear away. By this point, the bear had begun dragging Rajesh Kumar's body toward the forest edge. This behavior, while appearing predatory, was later explained by wildlife experts as typical defensive movement. Sloth bears often drag perceived threats away from the initial confrontation point to establish a safer distance. Mahendra and his son Vikram approached as closely as they dared, throwing stones and shouting while maintaining a safe distance from the clearly agitated bear. Their efforts eventually caused the animal to release its grip on Rajesh Kumar and retreat into the underbrush, though it remained visible among the trees, watching the humans with evident agitation. Upon reaching Rajesh Kumar, Mahendra immediately recognized that the injuries were catastrophic. The bear's initial attack had targeted the victim's face and throat with devastating precision, severing the carotid artery and causing massive trauma to the trachea. Death had likely occurred within seconds of the initial bite, according to the subsequent medical examiner's report. Using Rajesh Kumar's mobile phone, which had fallen nearby during the attack, Vikram contacted emergency services while Mahendra remained with the body. Police and Forest Department officials arrived approximately 40 minutes later, by which time the bear had disappeared deeper into the forest. The investigation that followed revealed several important contextual factors. The sloth bear population in the Western Ghats had been experiencing increasing pressure from habitat fragmentation, with roads and agricultural expansion forcing bears to navigate increasingly narrow wildlife corridors between suitable habitat patches. The previous month had seen unusually low rainfall, reducing natural food availability and potentially contributing to the bear's stressed condition. Authorities located and identified the responsible bear 3 days later using tracking dogs and hair samples collected from the attack site. Following established wildlife conflict protocols, the animal was tranquilized and relocated to a more remote protected area rather than euthanized, as evidence suggested the attack was purely defensive rather than predatory or indicative of abnormal behavior. In the aftermath of the tragedy, Rajesh Kumar's story became a somber cautionary tale throughout Maharashtra's rural communities. Mahendra Gaikwad, profoundly affected by witnessing the incident, became an unofficial wildlife safety ambassador in surrounding villages, sharing his experience to prevent similar tragedies. He often told listeners that the entire incident had unfolded in less than 60 seconds, a stark reminder of how quickly an innocent miscalculation in wild spaces can become fatal. An attack occurred during the peak salmon run of August 2017, when the rivers of Kodiak Island teemed with fish and the bears that hunted them. Kodiak Island, the largest island in the Kodiak archipelago off Alaska's southern coast, spans nearly 3,600 square miles of rugged wilderness. Known for its unique subspecies of brown bear, the Kodiak, this isolated ecosystem has remained largely unchanged for centuries, hosting North America's largest bears in a landscape of mountains, forests, and salmon-rich waterways. Thomas Anderson Calloway, a 47-year-old commercial fisherman from Juneau, had spent 2 decades navigating Alaska's coastal waters. Though primarily occupied with deep-sea fishing, Thomas occasionally indulged in recreational angling during the off-seasons. This particular summer found him taking a rare 3-week vacation, with Kodiak's legendary salmon runs as his destination. Having arrived on the island 5 days earlier, Thomas had established a solitary camp along the Karluk River, approximately 12 miles from the nearest settlement. The river, renowned for its sockeye salmon runs, cuts through the southwestern portion of the island before emptying into Shelikof Strait. Thomas had secured the necessary permits and attended the mandatory safety briefing, where rangers emphasized proper bear safety protocols, including maintaining clean camps and carrying bear deterrents. On the morning of August 17th, Thomas rose before dawn, eager to take advantage of the early fishing hours when salmon activity peaked. The weather had turned surprisingly warm for Kodiak, with temperatures reaching 68 degrees Fahrenheit by mid-morning. According to his journal, later recovered from his campsite, Thomas had planned to try a section of the river approximately 1 mile downstream from his camp, where he had observed particularly active salmon the previous evening. At approximately 5:45 a.m., Thomas waded knee-deep into the cool waters of the Karluk. He had positioned himself on a gravel bar that extended into a wide bend in the river, a strategic location where salmon tended to pool before continuing upstream. The early morning light cast long shadows across the water, and a light mist hung above the surface, limiting visibility to roughly 30 yards in any direction. Unknown to Thomas, a massive male Kodiak bear had established a fishing territory along this same stretch of river. Based on subsequent investigations, wildlife officials estimated the bear weighed approximately 1,500 pounds, an exceptionally large specimen even by Kodiak standards. Photographs from automated wildlife cameras positioned upstream had captured images of this particular bear over several seasons, showing it to be approximately 12 years old and in its physical prime. Territorial behavior intensifies during mating season, which typically concludes in late July, leaving male bears particularly aggressive into August. This behavioral pattern, combined with the bear's established fishing area, created conditions for a potential conflict that morning. What exactly triggered the attack remains speculative. Mark Piotrowski, a 53-year-old fisherman from Anchorage who had been fishing approximately 200 yards downstream, reported hearing a splash followed by shouting at approximately 6:15 a.m. Looking upstream through the morning mist, Mark observed a large bear charging through shallow water toward what appeared to be another fisherman. By Mark's account, the bear moved with astonishing speed, covering the distance to Thomas in seconds. The bear struck with such force that Thomas was knocked backward into deeper water. As Thomas attempted to regain his footing, the bear delivered a powerful bite to his left arm, which he had raised in a defensive posture. Mark immediately reached for his signal flare, standard equipment for many Alaska fishermen specifically for bear encounters. As he approached, he discharged the flare approximately 30 yards from the attack site. The bright light and sulfurous smell momentarily distracted the bear, which released Thomas and turned toward this new threat. Taking advantage of the diversion, Thomas staggered toward the shoreline, his left arm hanging uselessly at his side. The bear, after briefly watching Mark, returned its attention to Thomas, likely perceiving him as the primary territorial invader. It charged again, catching Thomas at the water's edge. Mark, having discharged his only flare, retrieved a metal fishing gaff from his pack and began creating as much noise as possible, striking nearby rocks and shouting while continuing to advance. He later told investigators that he remembered the park ranger's advice that groups of humans typically deter bear attacks better than individuals. His tactic proved effective. After inflicting additional injuries to Thomas's shoulder and back, the bear finally retreated, moving upstream and disappearing into the riparian vegetation that lined the riverbank. Mark reached Thomas, finding him conscious but in severe shock. Using his satellite phone, Mark contacted emergency services, providing coordinates and a situation assessment. The remote location and limited landing areas complicated rescue efforts, delaying the helicopter's arrival by nearly 2 hours. During this critical period, Mark applied makeshift tourniquets using fishing line and cloth torn from his shirt to slow the bleeding from Thomas's most severe wounds. He also covered Thomas with emergency thermal blankets from his survival kit to combat shock and hypothermia, despite the relatively warm morning. Alaska State Troopers arrived via helicopter at 8:40 a.m., accompanied by a wilderness paramedic who stabilized Thomas for transport. The medical evaluation revealed extensive injuries: compound fractures to his left humerus and scapula, deep lacerations across his back exposing portions of his rib cage, and puncture wounds to his left shoulder that had damaged the brachial nerve bundle. Thomas was airlifted to Providence Kodiak Island Medical Center for initial stabilization before being transferred to Anchorage for specialized surgical intervention. He underwent 7 hours of surgery to repair the structural damage to his arm and shoulder. While physicians managed to save the limb, Thomas permanently lost approximately 60% of function in his left arm due to nerve damage. Following the attack, Alaska Department of Fish and Game officials conducted a thorough investigation. Using DNA samples collected from Thomas's clothing and comparing them with their genetic database of monitored Kodiak bears, they positively identified the specific bear responsible. Given the bear's territorial behavior rather than predatory intent, officials opted not to euthanize the animal but instead to temporarily close that section of the Karluk River to human activity for the remainder of the salmon run. Despite his injuries, Thomas returned to commercial fishing 9 months after the attack, adapting his techniques to accommodate his physical limitations. The incident joined the relatively small but significant catalog of bear-human conflicts on Kodiak Island, where the unique subspecies of brown bear has coexisted with human inhabitants for centuries.